Forest products are a very diverse industry. It produces everything from paper and toothpicks to the highest-end black walnut lumber. Such diversity in the market has necessitated a classification system, so timber can be merchandised and sorted according to what products and markets will get it its best value. Today I wanted to talk about the three main categories of forest products as it relates to standing timber and the differences between the three. These three categories are pulpwood, sawtimber, and veneer. And let's begin by discussing pulpwood, and I have conveniently placed myself next to a piece of hardwood pulp. Historically speaking, pulpwood refers to wood that will be turned into pulp and used for paper making. And I actually have some wood pulp right here to show you. This is wood pulp. Essentially what it is it's wood that has been ground up, the fiber separated and the lignin removed, and then bleached. And this wood pulp will then be used to process further into various paper products. Its consistency basically just feels like wet toilet paper, if you want to imagine that. It's paper that hasn't yet taken its final form. Now, even though that's the historical and traditional definition of pulpwood, these days it's used to describe a whole array of different products, from wood that'll be turned into pellets, chips, even firewood. I think my rule of thumb is that if it's going to be pulverized or burned, it probably qualifies as pulpwood. Pulpwood is the lowest quality and lowest value product. It consists of small trees, as well as trees that are too poor quality to be used for any greater product. Either softwood or hardwood can be used as pulp, but the qualities between the two differs a little bit in what qualifies as pulp. Because most softwood species grow in a more or less uniform fashion, it's usually smaller individuals that qualify as pulpwood. For hardwood, however, it's usually quality that limits whether or not something can be used as sawtimber. And so hardwood pulpwood usually consists of poor quality species, or species that don't have much value as sawtimber to begin with. Take, for example, this white birch. It has about a 30-degree lean, it's crooked all the way up through the stem, it's forked, and it's from a product that doesn't have much value as sawtimber to begin with. In this situation, the tree's highest and best use is going to be as some form of pulpwood. Whether it goes for paper making or just local firewood depends on the markets. Pulpwood can also consist of large and overgrown, overmatured and declining trees like this one. It simply has too many scars, too many cracks, too much rot, and overall too many defects to be used as sawtimber, despite it being a valuable species, sugar maple. Because pulpwood consists of both small trees and trees with defect, every tree will start its life as pulpwood, but as it grows, some will graduate into the next classification, sawtimber. Next up, we have a product that I'm sure will be familiar to most, and that is sawtimber. And to demonstrate, we're sitting next to a piece of sugar maple sawtimber. Now, broadly speaking, sawtimber refers to any tree from which lumber will be milled, like this piece right here. Now, this is actually a piece of bird's eye maple that is sawn from a piece of sugar maple, like the species behind me. Now, what's important to remember here is that a piece of lumber like this, because it has some of those flecks of bird's eye in it, this isn't actually the most numerous, but it's a good example here. Pieces of lumber like this are going to be used for surfaces that are meant to be visually, aesthetically pleasing. And so with hardwood sawtimber, quality is going to be a prime characteristic. Whereas with pulpwood, the product is ultimately going to be ground or burned, quality doesn't really matter that much. So either small wood or wood that is too poor quality is suitable. With sawtimber, however, we want to get at least a little bit of quality to be able to produce lumber that can fetch a high price. It's a bit different with softwood, however. Most of the lumber that comes from softwood is structural dimensional lumber, and because softwood grows in a more or less uniform fashion, it's okay to have some knots as long as there's enough size to mill. So the characteristic for softwood sawtimber is usually just the diameter and length of the stem, whereas with hardwood we want to see a fair amount of quality. That is, as few branches as possible, as few scars, cracks, anything like that, twists, bends. We want as little of that as possible. There is some tolerance, however. As you can see with this tree, there's a dead branch that sticks out in the middle, but generally speaking we want to see at least 3 clear faces. Now, that rule is not universal by any means. Not only is every sawmill going to have different specifications for what they can tolerate in terms of defect, but there are certain species that it's just more tolerable to have defect in general. For example, black walnut generally has a very poor quality stem, and so the lumber grading rules are entirely different for that species. Whereas every tree will begin its life as a piece of pulpwood, only a small percentage is going to advance into the sawtimber category. The formula for producing sawtimber is quality plus time. Now this is veneer. Veneer is essentially wood that has been unwound from a log with sharp blades to produce very thin pieces of wood that can then be overlain on cheaper, less aesthetic surfaces. This is where veneer comes from. Trees that are both very large, at least 18 inches in diameter, and have almost no defect. It's probably fair to say zero defect. In fact, the criteria for veneer are so stringent, I'm not even sure if this tree qualifies. I don't think there's actually a single piece of veneer on this property, but this tree is a good enough fill-in. Take the formula from the last classification of sawtimber, which was quality plus time, put the entire thing in parentheses and slap a 3 in front of it, there's your new formula. You need a lot more quality and a lot more time. If every tree starts his life as pulpwood, and then a certain percentage graduate into sawtimber, a very, very small percentage is going to graduate into veneer. Now, what percentage is going to be veneer is ultimately going to depend on both your area and the management of the forest. Where I live in Maine, we're kind of at the northern boundary of most hardwoods, especially most valuable hardwoods. So a very, very small percentage are veneer logs. But if you live somewhere like Pennsylvania or West Virginia, a larger percentage might ultimately become veneer. Regardless, a good rule of thumb is this: if you have to ask whether or not a tree is veneer, it isn't. But what they lack in frequency, they make up for in value. Whereas pulp might yield you $10 a ton, and sawtimber might yield you $400 to $700 per 1,000 board feet, a good veneer log can yield you in excess of $1,000, even $1,500 per 1,000 board feet. So if there's any takeaway from this video, it would be this: always remember that the value of your timber is a function of both quality and time. And I think it's illustrated well in this chart right here. The lowest amount of time and the lowest amount of quality is going to give you the lowest value product, which is pulpwood. Add a little more time and more quality, and you're going to have a stand of sawtimber, which is definitely laudable. And then with enough quality and enough time, you can end up with a lot of veneer, which is going to yield you by far the most value. That should be an essential principle to remember when you're considering harvesting your land or managing your land for the future. More quality, more time, more money. So I hope that answers your question and helps you understand a little more about forest products and how timber is classified. If you enjoyed this content and found it useful, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, left a comment, and subscribed. There'll be more helpful content coming your way. Until next time.